Hello, and welcome to today's edition of the Languages and Community Runtime Stand-Up. I'm Chet Husk, and here with me today co-hosting we have Bill.
It's Bill Wagner. I'm also super excited about this. This is one of my favorite new features. So let's bring in our guests.
Absolutely. We have two amazing guests today. We have Damian Edwards and Jared Parsons, and they're going to talk to us today about a newer, simpler, more straightforward way of running our code. Take it from there, guys. Let's see what's going on.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, so thanks for having us on this edition of the Community Stand-Up. I don't think I've ever been on the Languages and Runtime Community Stand-Up. So yeah, we wanted to come on today and talk about something that we announced at Build, which was the ability to run C# without a project being built into .NET 10. So some folks watching may have seen that demo. It's like a 15-minute demo. You can go watch it on YouTube. Obviously, we'll show some stuff in a minute. And really want to answer people's questions and things about it, because there was a lot of very interesting questions about how this works. But first of all, I just wanted to quickly talk about our motivations and why are we doing this? What is this for? So just to kind of set the scene. So we kind of had two customers in mind when we set out to build this feature in .NET 10. The main customer, the primary cohort, as we say, is learners. So people who are new to C#, who are just learning about C# for the first time, or .NET. And we essentially wanted to strip back as much ceremony and as much sort of conceptual count or concept count while people are learning C#. And now, of course, folks who have been using .NET for a while, which I'm assuming is most people watching this show, that I'm assuming we're not having like brand newbies watching today. But to set the stage for existing customers, we've been on this journey for a little bit already. So we've been modifying what the sort of default C# experience is in a new application for 4 or 5 years now. Like the biggest changes folks remember are probably the ones we did in .NET 6, which would have been, Jared, what version of C# was that? 10? 9?
I think 9. I think it was 9.
Okay. So we introduced this top level statements thing, which meant that you didn't have to have like a main class or main method, I should say, on a program class, and import namespaces and whatnot, because we had top level statements and we had implicit usings. And so now your sort of application could be as simple as a C# file with one line in it, console write line, hello world, but you still had to have a project, and the project is XML. And while we've done a lot of work to simplify the project as part of the .NET Core and now modern .NET, you still had to have it. And sort of the modality that you worked in was always like, I have a project that's in its own folder. When I build, I get these directories like bin and obj, and there's a bunch of stuff in them. Like that is the world when working with C#. And so we wanted to figure out, can we make a simpler world a step before that, effectively, in someone's learning or complexity adoption journey? Because this is very much not about removing projects forever. It's not about inventing a new alternate mode, really. It's about creating an earlier or simpler click stop, as I like to say. Or if you imagine like a conceptual arc that you're on when you're learning something, we wanted to make the beginning of that arc simpler, like a little, nice graduations as you learn concepts about working with C# and .NET. So that was the primary goal. The secondary goal is that, right, well, now you can just run C# directly. That opens up a whole bunch of new scenarios potentially for folks who want to use C# in places that maybe it didn't feel quite as natural to use it before. Or it just felt like there was too much burden, too much ceremony. It was just too heavy, whatever that means to you. Now, if all I need to have is a file and I can run it, and I can have like two files next to each other and run them independently, people naturally start thinking, hey, I could use C# for more things than I perhaps used to before. A lot of folks refer to that as scripting, which makes total sense. But to be clear, when we start showing some stuff here, we'll talk about how this is actually working under the covers. And so why that definition might be maybe causing some people to think it works a certain way, when actually it's really not much different going on here when you're working with C# this way. So I'm going to share my screen. If you want to share my screen for me, Chet, and we'll start like showing some code to go along with what we're talking about here.
Yeah, happy to, because there's already been some comments. People are very excited about what they've seen so far.
Okay.
So let's see if we can get everybody else on board.
Okay. So I am in a brand new folder. It's got nothing in it. And so imagine again that you are learning C# for the first time. I'm just going to do like code dot. I'm just going to open VS Code directly in this folder. And so I have nothing going on in here. I'm just going to make things a bit bigger. And so I'm going to go ahead and create my first file. So I'm going to do hello.cs. Here I am now. I'm in C#. We don't need to see all this stuff going on. And now I can just write code, right? So I can do console.writeline. Copilot's going to make this really easy for me. Don't have to do anything. And then I can go back to my terminal now. And you can see that that file exists. So now I can do .NET run hello.cs. Whoops. I love how my terminal is just like giving away everything that I've ever used. I probably should figure out how to turn that stuff off when I'm doing demos, shouldn't I? And so I can run .NET run hello.cs. And you can see it's taking a little bit this first time, right? So like I've got a stopwatch in my prompt, so you can actually see how long things are taking every time, which is kind of cool. And if I run it again, immediately you'll see it was quicker, right? It kind of reused stuff that was going on. I can go up here and say, hey, let's change this. So I'll change this to hello changed, come back and we'll run it again. And this time we'll see a time that's probably in the middle, right? So it didn't take 4 seconds, but it didn't take 660 milliseconds. It took about a second.
Looks like you didn't save that. Yeah.
What's that?
Looks like you didn't save. So it was really fast because it didn't recompile.
That's very true.
Can you also click once or twice up font size in VS Code next time you go back? Lovely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Whoa, that's way too big.
There we go.
How about that? That's better. So
looks like we're having a little bit of internet instability. You back, Damian?
yeah, I think so. Like I saw Jared the whole time, but I lost 2 of you.
Okay, I think we're all back.
That was odd. Okay, so what's actually happening here behind the scenes when I run this, I'm just running this file directly, is the .NET Run command line tool is effectively creating a virtual project behind the scenes. So we haven't invented a new sort of technology to run C#. It's not like it's really bypassing anything that you're familiar with already today. It's just that it's doing that default step for you of, well, you know, you have a C# file. In order to run that, I need to create a project. So let me do that for you. If you want to know what that project looks like, well, it basically looks like you would expect a .NET New Console app project to look, right? It's very simple behind the scenes, except that we've modified a few things in order to narrow down what's happening in this scope. So, you know, it's one file, for example. We're not finding all files in the directory. This is, at the moment, is very much strictly a single file experience, but it is still using MS Build effectively behind the scenes. And so we actually get some benefits from that because there are features that we still support by virtue of the fact that virtually there is still a project here just behind the scenes. You just can't see it. It doesn't exist until you actually run the thing that's going on. So this is the most basic sample I can do in the world, right? Hello.cs. But there comes a time in your learning journey usually when you then want to do more than what's available in the framework. Obviously, because this is .NET, I have, you know, the whole base class library available to me, but there may be some feature that I want to use that isn't available to me. And so we have this rich package ecosystem in NuGet that we can use. Now, traditionally, you would need a project file to reference a NuGet package. And so if we were thinking back to that learning arc, quite soon you would have to step off this simple file-based experience and go into the full project-based experience. So we wanted to, again, go and create some more notches on that learning arc so that you didn't have to jump to projects until you really needed the features and the inherent complexity that comes along with them. And, you know, the concepts that they bring along as well. And so we have invented a new concept in here, which is this idea of what we call an ignored directive. So this gets a little technical in terms of like the layers of what's going on in the language versus the compiler versus the project system and all the rest of it. But people who are familiar with .NET are probably used to these directives, pound directives or hashes or whatever term you use to explain that character. Maybe a hash if is a very popular one in order to tell the compiler, hey, if I'm in this sort of have this defined constant in my build system, then include this code, otherwise don't include this code. And there are a few different directives built in, and they're all understood by basically at the language level and the compiler. So we've invented this new #: thing, which from the language's point of view just says, oh, this is a directive that I don't need to worry about. The language doesn't really care about this. This is a directive that's intended to be consumed by something higher level than the language, like the tool that is like doing the compilation, like the compiler, for example, or the .NET run command line is what's going to consume this line here. And so we've added new directives in order to support some features that we think make sense in this sort of new modality on your learning journey. And so we have this ability to bring in a package. So I can do something like, humanizer, and I can say, I think it's 2 point something. So I'm just going to say 2.star. So this is a syntax, package ID @ followed by a version that is actually now being standardized on in the .NET CLI experience. And so one of the things you'll notice as we kind of walk through this experience is we're really trying to align syntax as much as we can where the same concepts show up. So that again, as a learner, on the learning journey, we introduce you to a syntax here, and then eventually when you move into, I have to go to the command line and write .NET, package list or .NET package add or something, or I'm in a different modality, then we want to see the same syntax show up if we can help it. And so this humanizer @ 2 point star is how I'm saying, hey, I want to bring in the humanizer package, and I know the humanizer package requires the use of a using statement. Now, at the moment, the tooling experience we have for these new application types is still under development. And so sometimes things like the package doesn't get restored automatically. And so that's why I'm getting a squiggly down here. So if I go and actually run this again, I'm not using anything yet. I'm just installing the package. We should see, hopefully, that the tooling will actually go ahead and recognize that that package has been restored, and I'll actually get IntelliSense. But then you can do things like console.writeLine, and I can do something like datetime.now.humanize. Oh, might be better to do a time span. Let's just do something like time span.from hours, -1, and then we say, humanize that. And then I'm going to go back. Oh, I got rid of my semicolon apparently. Go back and we'll run that. And so it says, hey, 1 hour, right? So that's that humanized package giving me that nice functionality of turning a time span into something more readable. And so you can see now my IntelliSense is working because I've run the command a few times. The tooling has picked up that package is there. So again, just to underline, this tooling experience is something that's very early, and we're obviously actively working on it. Our goal is to make this like super, super snappy and super, super productive. But this idea of being able to reference packages directly from the file means I can stay in this single file experience and still get all the utility of using packages. There's a couple of other directives that we've added support for. So in the cases where you need to set what would have been a property in the project file, you can literally set those properties directly in here. So if I want to change my target framework, for example, to .NET 9 instead of .NET 10, which is what we're running on by default because we're using the .NET 10 SDK, I can do that, and it works that way. And I think in the version I've got installed, it's a space, but eventually we're actually going to standardize that to an equals for all the reasons I gave before about trying to introduce syntax that then is consistent as you move through the journey of learning C#. And then for more advanced scenarios, you can also set the SDK for this project. So by default, it's going to be the standard Microsoft.NET SDK. You don't have to look at that. It's not, by default, we just infer that. But if you need to change to another SDK, like the Web SDK or one of the new test SDKs, or even like a Razor class library SDK, or some of the more advanced stuff that we may not even have a good experience for in single file yet, you can set up the SDK here by doing so, because SDKs bring in a lot of capabilities. And those are the 3 that we currently support. Now, that's kind of the end of the introduction of what run file looks like. Like, it's actually very, very straightforward, and it's a very limited set of features. But because it is based on the same primitives under the covers, there's the same technology, there's a bunch of other things that kind of work that we haven't really talked about yet, unless people have asked specific questions, that you kind of get for free. And so I think it's worth just like mentioning and talking about some of these things to kind of show some of the more advanced things that I've been experimenting with by virtue of how things work. So the first thing is like global JSON. Yeah, of course, global JSON works. If you're using the .NET CLI, then and any .NET CLI command, then the global JSON gets honored in terms of selecting what version. I don't have to show that. But when it comes to building code, we have these what we call implicit MS build files or implicit build files. And so people may have seen directory.build.props or directory.build.targets, which are these two special file names that MS Build will find when it's evaluating and then building your project. Those are still supported in this world. Like we didn't do anything to turn them off. We're still creating a virtual project behind the scenes, so those things still work. So you can think of those in this scenario as a bit of an escape hatch. If there's something that you want to do that you can't directly do directly in the file because we simply haven't exposed that in order to keep the concept count down, you might be able to do it by setting it just in a directory build.targets or directory build.props. So I actually have another repo, which I have open over here. Nope, not this one. Let me open it up. So I do have a repo where I basically play around with a whole bunch of stuff to do with this while we're building out this feature. And it's in Damian Edwards /run file. So if I just open this repo, I'm going to zoom in once this is open. There's like a whole bunch more files here. Under this flat folder, this is an example of just a bunch of individual apps where each app is its own file, and they all show various things. Some of these work, some of them don't mind, Damian. Some of them are aspirational, so it's worth talking about.
I think be bigger.
Bigger again. One more.
Biggen.
Yep.
Perfect.
One more. About there. That looks good from what I can see. And so I would point folks to here if they just want to kind of explore some of the things. If they have a question, for example, and they want to see if it's already been answered, you can do it in here. But bear in mind, not all of this stuff works. Like some of this stuff I've just like, oh, what might it look like if we made this work at some point in the future? And so half of this stuff works and half of it doesn't. But a lot of the stuff in the flat folder works. And so here's an example of, say, an Aspire app host project. Which is a much more complicated project to date. Like it has a custom SDK, you have to reference a few packages. But what would it look like if we had this as a single file? Well, you can combine the SDK directives and the package directives to get you into a world where, like this would at least build. And then maybe there's some assumptions that the APIs currently make about the modality in which they're running that don't work. But it's interesting to see what can these files start looking like when you start to do more things. Things like benchmark.net, this doesn't work yet, but again, we're thinking about what would it mean to have a file that contains all my benchmarks, and what would a framework like benchmark.net need to do in order to support this. Some of these just like work without them having to do any work, and other things, some of the more complicated frameworks like testing frameworks or things like benchmark.net that do like a whole bunch of ceremony behind the scenes to make their features work, they make assumptions that perhaps don't hold up now that you're running from a single
Maybe
source
I'm
file.
looking a little far in the future here, but it looks like for Cat specifically, you're investigating what it might look like to have naming convention based associations between some of these files, which I believe you and I talked about for like RID specific things a la Golang like years ago. So it's kind of cool to see some of those experiments happen.
Yeah. So I had this this idea in my mind of like, if I had an app called Cat, for example, which is just a really cheap ripoff of the built-in Cat tool, right, in most OSs. And then I wanted to have a set of benchmarks for that and a set of tests for that. I'd love to just be able to have cat.cs, cat.benchmarks.cs, and cat.test.cs. But that's actually a quite complicated scenario to support for us behind the scenes, just by virtue of what each of those files represents. But as a user experience, it's actually super appealing to me. Like we've seen lots of signal, especially from folks who come to C# or to .NET from other ecosystems, where they're somewhat surprised that, to write some tests, they have to go and create a whole other thing, a whole project with a whole folder, and it's separate. Then you have to add a reference to the thing that you want to test, et cetera, et cetera. And they might just be more used to being able to have a file with some stuff and then another file with some tests, right? And so trying to explore what that might look like and what that means is things that we're already doing. Now, again, to be clear, a lot of these things will not make it into .NET 10. For .NET 10, we're very, very focused on, I have a single CS file, it represents an app, I can run it. and I can get a good editor experience in VS Code and enabling things like basic debugging and those type of things as well. That's our absolute focus for .NET 10. But while a lot of that stuff is being worked on, I am exploring some ideas over in this repo and discussing it with the team about what some of those things could look like. Yeah, so good eyes on picking those things up. Also, what's happening is when people log issues on the repo, or they ask me questions on socials about how do I do this, or does this work? I typically just go and create a file in here to figure it out, and then I point them to the file. So yeah, look, it works already. So we had someone log in a question about environment variables last week, and they were like, hey, it'd be nice if there was an easy way to access environment variables inside here, inside these directives. So for example, they wanted to be able, they proposed some replacement syntax like you would often see in shell scripts and things like that. And I was like, well, because it's already MS Build, and MS Build already supports referencing environment variables as long as the environment variable name is a valid MS Build property name, it just works. We don't have to invent anything. And so for example, here's a directive. And so instead of having to invent a way to replace environment variable values in this directive with some token, I'm just using standard MS Build tokens here. And I say, hey, I assume I have a property called envar constant. And so if I go to the command line and I declare envar constant and then I run this, then this constant will get defined by virtue of whatever value is in that environment variable, right? It just works. You don't have to do anything to make this work because MS Build already has support for those things. And so this was just a sample in order to demonstrate to someone that you can already do those things. You just have to think a little bit about the existing features that are there in things like MS Build and C# and how they combine with this new concept that we introduced, which is this # directive for setting things like properties.
What's super interesting about this is like you've leaned into making like defined constants and other properties behave exactly as they would in a project file today.
Yep.
But I think there's also some space for correcting some of the warts or some of the foot guns that users experience today. So like me with my MS Build eyes on, I see you've done the right thing here with defined constants where it may have a value from other parts of the build process.
Right.
And so if you want to add to it, you have to remember to put defined constants' current value somewhere in.
Yep.
But it's possible that with this modality, we could do something nicer, like if the user just put in custom content, envar constant, we could implicitly append.
Yes.
Right? So that kind of thing is exciting to me because I'm very familiar with all of the rough edges of the MS Build user experience.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, is that what I didn't mention in kind of our philosophy and our customer base that we're targeting here is one of our primary philosophies with building this is that you can always take one of these file-based apps and then with a simple CLI command, you can convert it into a project-based app. And so that scopes us with regards to new features or new syntax or new behavior that we want to invent. Because if we invent something that works in file-based apps, but then you run the conversion and there's nothing to map it to in the project world, or even in order to map it to the project world, we would have to do something kind of wacky. Like you would have to like dump a huge XML block with a custom target. Like that means we're not going to invent that feature. We're not going to do that in file-based apps. And so we often have ideas like you just said. It's like, oh, great. There's a whole fresh start effectively. Let's see if we can change some things, but we have to gauge it against that philosophy. It's like, okay, we can do new things. We can fix, for example, defaults that we wish we had been able to fix in the past, but if we do so, it would be too big a breaking change. We can change that here because none of these apps exist yet. And so that's a really good example, the one that you just gave that I hadn't considered. Another one that we're talking about, in fact, we're actually implementing right now, is changing these to be native AOT by default, which is a really big, like, philosophical difference, right? But someone asked about supporting publishing these app types to an artifact. So you can run .NET Build on these today. You can run .NET Restore on these, and obviously you can run .NET Run. But you had not been able to run .NET Publish, but we're working on that right now. So then the question becomes, okay, why would we support .NET Publish on these app types rather than just telling you to convert it into a project if we have this philosophy that you can always convert to a project and then you're in project mode? Well, it does give us the opportunity to change some defaults. And so customers have come to us already in the short time that this has been announced and said, hey, I have this idea for how I would use this. This is great. But it requires you to support publish. Like I want to be able to have a bunch of like test files, for example, sample apps for my library in my repo. And I don't want to have to create a folder and a project for every single one, because each one of them is just a very simple app. Like I might only have 10 lines of code in each one to demonstrate a concept, but I want them all to be publishable so that I can then use them elsewhere, or whatever it might be. And so then we go, okay, if we're going to support publish, wow, maybe we should consider changing what the default publish mode is for an app like this, for something like native AOT. And so that's currently what we're planning on. So, you know, someone floated it, and then I kind of talked about it in a GitHub issue. And the more people I talked to, the more support there was for saying, hey, yeah, let's just make this native AOT by default. Why not? It'll still convert over to a project perfectly fine. It's that when you convert it to a project, it'll have publish AOT equals true in the project file, which is what you do today if you do that. And if you don't want it to be native AOT, then you just say, you know, property, if I can type, property publish AOT equals false, right? And that's how you turn it off. It's as simple as that. It's just that would now be the default, is that it would be true. Now, and then if it annoys you that you have to do that in a bunch of files because you don't want them to be AOT, go back to what I said before. We support implicit build files. So you can just drop a directory.build.props in the root of your repo or in the root of a parent folder, put the full syntax for a property in XML in there, and then this will get inherited by all of your file-based apps underneath it as well. So it was important for us that we weren't going to create like this alternate universe where when you have apps like this, they don't honor any of the existing things that work in like project-based land. We really wanted there to be kind of the ability to use things that already work from projects like implicit build files in this world. And as I said, that ability to easily convert from a file-based app to a project when you need the ability that a full project gives you. I think it's fair to say that, pick some number. I'll just say 80%, right? But it's probably a bit lower. But you could probably look at 80% of the projects that are created on the planet that are apps, and they are simple enough that they could just be single file apps, assuming you didn't need more than one C# file. Right? That's a big caveat. We're only doing single file in .NET 10, and we are looking at doing multi-file in .NET 11. But I think for a lot of applications, folks are very comfortable just using a single file, whether it's as part of a learning experience, like I said, or they're doing a specific app type that it really never needs the complexity that comes with using projects. And based on what we've seen so far from customers, that seems to be true. Jared?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, one example of that is like within as your repositories get more complex, you end up writing lots of little tools to help either manage your infrastructure, your internal processes. Maybe you have some tools to kind of like regenerate a bunch of files in your repo, whatever. And today that results in, a whole bunch of a big directory structure. Every directory has like, your single file, your project file, whatever. Whereas this allows you to like much more simply condense that into just like a directory with a series of files, and each one of your files, like, here's my tool that does this one thing that I can keep going. And there's also, I think, a lot of opportunity we have PowerShell scripts today in our repo where the PowerShell scripts represent like that tension between, this is a simple concept I want to do, but I didn't use a C# application because for whatever reason, the mental hurdle of like, let me add a project, let me add target frameworks just got a little too high. So I wrote some PowerShell, where now it's like, just convert that all to like a single file. Like, what's stopping us? And so I definitely think that's another use case that people like me are definitely super interested in.
And it's great, I think, that we have these two.
So that's one thing you've both
gone.
I was going to say, there's one thing you both kind of danced around that I think we want to dive into just a little bit. So other than the hash colon at the top, everything is just like, your programmed CS in the top level statements file. I have my effectively what's main. And if I had record types or data structures or even a full class hierarchy, if I was going nuts, I could put whatever I wanted down there, and it would, so that path gets smoother if I do become a project, but I'm also not limited to just statements. I can define types in here too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so just as I've done here, again, none of this is new. This has been possible since top level statements were introduced in .NET 6. But yeah, this works the way that top level statements works. I can have a class down here, I can put methods down here that are actually local methods inside the main that gets projected from this. So I can do something like void foo right in here and put that in there. So this is actually a method that exists inside the main along with these. And then if I want to have an actual type, I can just declare the type down here, and that goes outside that in terms of where it gets projected in the C# kind of space. So all those things are possible. It is very easy for us just to show, oh, look, here's a hello world, but you make a really good point, Bill. In fact, I have an app here that Stephen Tobe vibe coded one day when he was on a walk, which is basically an emulation of Space Invaders in the console. And so it has one top level statements, which is new up this game class and called run, but all the logic is actually in this game class. And you can see it's like a class with a bunch of private stuff and a bunch of logic and a bunch, it's just like an app, like you would write it typically. And I think it's like 250 lines. But if I go to the terminal and I actually run this, I'm not going to risk running it in the VS Code terminal. It'll probably work, but I know it works in my Windows terminal. So if I go over here and I navigate to where we are, let me zoom up. So we're in GitHub, we're in Damian, we're in run file, we're in not fault, we're in flat. And then I .NET run Space Invaders. Oops. Oh no, I've installed a version and I've broken my, what's it saying? Cannot be loaded because you intended a requested SDK. Oh, okay. I changed global JSON in here yesterday and I broke my application and I broke this repo because I did it on a different machine. So if I just go in here and change this to preview 4, and then we'll see if this rolls forward. So it's building this now behind the scenes, right? The first time. And as I've said before, this is something we're working on. And now I've got my Space Invaders running in my terminal. So you can absolutely build more complicated things than Hello World because you can already do that in top level statements in a single file. There's nothing stopping you doing that today. Oh, so there's a question. Yeah, I haven't even
many
mentioned
questions. We can like run through a whole bunch.
One question, just because it's relevant. Yeah.
What happened? Okay, so let's.
At the top of that, you have
about...
that hash bang in the top of the game.
Yeah. So let me talk about hash bang.
I think I'm seeing the same problem we are with like. There we go.
Let me open up Ubuntu in WSL to talk about. This is called a shebang or a hash bang. But if you search on the internet for the word shebang, you'll learn all about what this thing is, right? And so I'm starting my WSL. My machine's being a little slow this morning, it seems like. I've been in the office for the past week, so I literally haven't turned this machine on in a week. It's been sleeping, and I've got like pending Windows updates and all types of things going on, so I may be asking a little bit of it. But this is a Linuxism. So this character set here at the beginning of a file says to the shell, hey, if this file is being directly executed, that is, you went to the shell and you typed like / the file name, or if you had it in the path and then you just type the file name, and it's been marked as executable, then look at this, and then I want you to actually invoke this executable. And you can pass generally only one argument, and then the shell will actually pass the file of this application, which in this case, this hello.cs file, to whatever you put on this line. And so it's effectively a way to make a source file directly executable. And so you often see this used with shell scripts where you have user bin /env, and then you run bash at the top here, or you point to some other type of executable. People use it with Python. People use it with basically anything that you can pass a source file to some execution host, and then it will run it in order to make it so you can just run that file directly. So that's what that's about. Yeah, my WSL is not starting up this morning. But we basically taught C# along with the #: as something to ignore. We said just ignore hashbang as well. That's all that means, is that we said, hey, ignore this now. And so now this is nothing that's being done by us in .NET or in C#. This is actually all done by the shell that you're executing in.
Cool. Well, there's a big long laundry list. Do you have sometime.
Let's try and do rapid fire questions, and we'll see if I can.
So first one is about some use cases.
Yep.
Could you do like interactive tests with this model?
So I literally was talking to someone on the team about this morning. I don't think I have the file in this repo. Let me find a picture of it. I know that sounds a little weird, but I actually have a screenshot of me doing this the other day. Okay, let's have a look. All right. Yeah, so this is what that could look like. So this is XUnit v3. And so I have my, foo.test.cs file. I've got a package directive in order to bring in XUnit. I give it a namespace, and then I go ahead and just create the class. Now, there's no actual top-level statements in this scenario. There's actually not even a program main in my application in this scenario because of the way that the newer test frameworks work, whereby they compile the test project into an executable, so it's directly launchable. The main is actually provided by the test framework. So they import some magic targets and or source generators to do that for you. But you can see down here, I was able to .NET run this test application as a single file, and it went ahead and ran my tests. I literally just copied this test code from the XUnit v3 docs as like their introduction to using XUnit and pasted it in here, and it just worked. Now, the challenge you're going to have with actually using this in .NET 10 is that we only support single file. You can't reference another file at the moment, but we are in the middle of adding support for referencing a project right now. And it's still not fully confirmed that we're going to support project references, but we've had enough questions about it, and people have talked about enough scenarios where referencing a project from these file-based apps would be useful, that we are exploring doing it, and there is a PR out to do it right now. So I'm not promising that we're going to do it, but we are looking at it. And so if we did support referencing of projects, you could just do #project up here, point to the project that contains the code that you want to test, and then you could write tests in a single file this way. So in a learning scenario, again, that might be something that's useful if you want to simplify what the user is being exposed to in that specific lesson, right? Rather than, no one's saying that you should go and write all your tests that way now and you shouldn't have projects for tests. No, that's not what we're saying. But we're saying in the context of learning, it can be very useful to remove as much other stuff around the actual lesson, the actual concept you're trying to teach, in order to simplify what the user is being exposed to so they can focus on the thing they're trying to learn.
Okay, controversial question coming up next.
Yeah.
So far, you've been showing everything in VS Code. What's the story?
Yeah, we're only going to support VS Code. So we have no plans to support VS for this at the moment. VS is inherently a solution and project-centric experience, especially for .NET. There's no support for using .NET without solutions and projects in Visual Studio today. And the cohort that we primarily are focusing on, like I said, which is learners, and then a secondary cohort of folks who are looking to be able to use C# for very simple utilities or script-like things. We just don't feel that the work to put it in V# is worth the effort, like in Visual Studio. Visual Studio Code is the natural home for these types of applications if we look at the wider ecosystem. And so we're doing this support in Visual Studio Code. We're not ruling out VS forever, but we have no plans to do it in VS at this point in time.
Gotcha. And there was some discussion about Writer in the chat. For those folks, I would suggest you go to IntelliJ's tracker and log something there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. There's a long laundry list more. Some of them are about internals. Like you mentioned, this is still using MS Build, so there's directory somewhere, right?
Yeah. Let's try and peek under the hoods, right? So if you were a curious person, what would you do? So if we remove all of this, right? So I have my app. What would you do to try and figure that out? Well, I might do something like console.writeline. Instead of write-lining hello world, I might do something like app context.base directory. Like, where are you running from? Like, tell me where you're running from. Okay, so let's just write that code and then let's run that and see what happens. So we'll go back out to wherever I am here. Oh, I'm in that folder. That was silly. So
might need to hide the question.
Oh, yeah. There we go.
Oh, yeah. And so if I run that now, what's it going to print out? So you can see it's printed out this long temp location. Now, it is in temp, but you'll notice that it's in a folder that's named after my file. So it actually says hello dash, and then there's this long like hash looking thing. So this is a stable location. That means it is in temp on Windows. That means that it's in my user temp. It's isolated to me as a user. If another user's on this machine, they can't like look in my temp and see what I'm doing. So we get that isolation. But it also means that for subsequent runs, we can cache stuff in here, just like we do in bin and obj today to make things faster. We get all those same benefits. So there is absolutely still a bin and obj going on. It's just that we hide it from you. There's no need for you to be able to see it in this world because we're just trying to teach you C#, for example, or you're working on the type of app where needing to be able to see what's bin and obj really isn't something that you need to be able to do. And you're not producing artifacts in this world that you need to then take somewhere else. In fact, when I mentioned that we're working on making publish supported, what I want to have happen is when you publish hello.cs, you get hello.exe next to hello.cs, right? That's the natural thing that I would expect as a person walking up to this stack for the first time. If all I knew was there's this hello.cs file, I run a command and it gives me an output, I would expect that to be a single exe next to it. Again, I haven't had any pushback on that yet, so I'm hoping that's what we do. But I think that helps to help people understand kind of the frame of mind that we're in when we're thinking about these features.
Yeah, sweet. And like, there is a ton of value in just getting bin and obj out of sight, right? It means you can't accidentally add them to source control easily. It means you can do like LSs and only see relevant things. It's one of the reasons why we did the artifacts output path in the SDK. So like, it's really nice. It's one of my favorite little side features of using this.
Right.
And it's just also helpful for kind of like the learner cohort. It's like these are kind of like obj. Like I know why obj exists because I work on the .NET, I work on the C# compiler, and I play around in MS Build. I'm guessing most learners, like all that's going to do is confuse them. Like I ran and what has been, if I look in, what happens when you look in the obj directory? Like what's that assets.json file? Like it's just, you're pushing things into the experience that is just confusing. And it's like putting it out here is a way of saying, let's keep the experience focused on the file.
Right.
Cool. So some questions about the user experience in the editor. Like, do we have discovery for packages in this experience?
Not yet, but we plan on adding it. So yes, absolutely. As I mentioned, our goal for .NET 10 is to make this experience like fantastic, right? And so that means, first of all, I would like statement completion for the directives that are valid here. So I shouldn't have to like type out package and know that it's package. I should get completion for that. And then once I get my cursor to this location, I would love it if it, after maybe typing 2 or 3 characters, I got, NuGet suggestions based on what I'm typing in here. So if I typed HUM, it would auto-complete based on package download or whatever metric is default for NuGet. Usually it's package download, I think, is what they use to sort results. And so that would be shown there. And then I would do @ and then the versions would be shown in here, right? So that's exactly what we're talking about building. In fact, I think someone in the community already built an extension for VS Code that literally adds that support for this line. Just to prove that it can be done. I think they did it in a weekend, right? So it's not like it's technically difficult to do. We just have to make sure we do it to the rigor that's required for us to do something and ship it as a default experience. But that's absolutely the type of thing that we want to enable. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are several questions that talk about MS Build concepts like global usings and things like that. Do those all still apply here?
So global usings are technically a C# concept, and then we have implicit usings, which we make work through MS Build, right, through the SDK. So we don't have a primitive in here to add an implicit using, because that kind of makes no sense. Like, why would you? It's not really implicit if you have to put it in the file, right? So we don't have that. You put the using in that you want. Now, because also we are single file, you can't declare global usings in another file and have them come in yet. So that's something, again, that we've scoped out of .NET 10 because multi-file is an order of magnitude more complicated than making single file work. And so we're going to get single file to work, but we absolutely want to make multi-file work in .NET 11. And we already have a document where we're exploring different approaches to making multi-file work. And so implicit usings that come with the SDK do work though. So I didn't have to bring in system because the default implicit usings from the Microsoft .NET SDK already bring in system. They already bring in, I think they bring in JSON, and that might be the web one. So depending on what SDK you do, they bring in different sets of usings. All that stuff still works. If you had a directory, so if I came out here and I did .NET new, what is it, like build targets, so I can put items in it. So this is going to drop a directory build targets in this project. Man, my machine is super slow today. I could, do an item group in here, and then, I really wish we had an editor for this, and I could do a using in here, and then I could bring in, include, what do we got? System.text.json, for example, right? And now inside here, system.text.json is going to be in scope. Now, I don't know if the editor picks this up yet because this is like insanely early builds. But if I go and
JSON serializer, yes.
So if see, it actually tried to do it because it doesn't realize that it's already in scope. And I did the deserial. We'll do serial. We'll do deserialize. Deserialize. No, I don't want to do all that. I just let me just do something really basic, and I do new object, right? And I do message hello world. That should be an equals, right? And then I go ahead and I write out that, and I can't type message, and we put that in here. Now again, the editor doesn't understand this, but if I run this .NET run hello. Now, what have I got? Type argument for method JSON cannot be.
You want deserialize, or sorry, serialize, not deserialize.
Oh, sorry, silly me. Yep.
Now, what's interesting to me is like completion was just working. It took it a second, but eventually it caught up that the using was there.
So the way the tooling works at the moment is it's literally trying to figure out, is this a file-based app or just a loose CS file? And the way it's doing that right now, it's just not accurate all of the time. Like there's a bit of a lag. And so you'll note that often the time it just takes a long time before it figures it out. Or if I run the app, then it figures it out. So like, obviously this is like literally the first build where anything works. But we're going to, improve all that so that it's lightning fast and the type of thing that you would expect.
Cool. There's a really interesting question that I will probably end up grandstanding a little on. So I apologize in advance. This one says, can we expect .NET install, which will install apps similar to Go install? And for this, and we'll put on my SDK PM hat, .NET tools are this today. .NET tools are how you easily distribute and acquire and run .NET apps that do this. But they have a big gap today, which is that they are framework dependent. You have to have a runtime to run them. Actually, as of Preview 6 next month, that won't be the case. We will support RID-specific tools, right? And that means you can either still depend on a framework and just bundle only native dependencies in your package, or Jared, you can go all the way. You can go self-contained and bundle everything in there, or you can go even further and AOT your tool package, and the tooling will consume that. And even better, if you're not going like full AOT, then you could have a single file like this. You could set the pack as tool property to true, run one .NET pack, and we will emit all of those required packages for you. Like, we worked really hard on making this easy to opt into and making the defaults really good for the RID specific packages. So like Preview 6 is, I think, going to change the game for .NET app distribution. Then on top of that, like that's just the authoring side. On top of that, we will have .NET Tool Exec, which will behave like NPX, which will automatically download and invoke the tool that you want. So you put these things together and you get a story where you're always getting the latest version of a tool. It's optimized for your platform. and you don't have to worry about like separately downloading it and running it, right? So like the tooling is coming together with the single file thing to make authoring and distributing and consuming these single file apps really, really nice, I think.
That's awesome. I love it. So the only thing that's missing for us to make that work is we need to support .NET Pack app.cs, which we don't currently. And I think
and
that's
then
an
like
issue.
Fundamentally, the weakness of the platform needing to AOT on the platform that you're targeting is a gap to the end-to-end there, but like that's a longer term solve.
Yeah. And like I think in the meantime, we can do things like provide good like GitHub guide and like GitHub templates, for example, that show you here's how you do a GitHub Actions workflow that builds on all 3 platforms and then brings the assets back together.
Look for the Preview 6 release notes for that specific example from me.
Yep. Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it.
Chocolate and peanut butter. All right. So we got a whole bunch more good stuff. There are some questions about multi-file and like project-to-project references that I think you touched on.
Yeah.
Maybe we can like wrap it up.
So the other one, so where we're currently working on supporting referencing projects. So we're literally working on supporting like this, path to hello.proj, right? And so in that world, that will just map to a project reference under the covers and everything that you expect works. Right now, you can't do that at the moment, but because we support directory build.targets, you can kind of work around it. And I've got that up here. So I've got this idea, this is a class lib project, and inside my class lib, it's a standard project, right? Then in my samples directory, that is a peer of that project directory, I have hello.cs and a directory build.targets. And I've just like putting the project reference inside the directory build.targets. And now every sample app, which is a separate file in this samples directory, will just get a reference to my class lib project. And this, I did this because someone asked me, hey, this looks like a great solution for when I have a GitHub repo that is just one class library that I ship as a NuGet package, but then I want to have a whole bunch of samples that show how to use that class library. It seems like a lot of overhead to have a separate folder and separate project for every one of those very simple samples. I'm like, yeah, you don't have to do that. You can literally just achieve this using kind of that backdoor implicit directory build targets hack. And that will get you the same outcome. And so this is how you could do it right now, but we are working on project references.
Gotcha.
I mean, I was reviewing the PR for adding the project references last night and this morning, and we're down to the tiny details on that one. It very likely that ends up in .NET 10 Preview 6, unless there's some kind of like infra fire. But Preview 7 is the absolute latest you would expect to see that at this point. I mean, the PR is just a few tiny things from being merged.
Cool. All these directives we've been looking at, are there any of them that would be relevant for classic project file-based experiences? Or is this all strictly single file and we're keeping it?
Strictly single file. What will happen is if you try and use these in a C# file that's in the context of a project, then you'll get an error, I think, or a warning. I can't remember. Is it a warning, Jared? What did we decide on?
It's an error right now. We might take it down to a warning. Whenever you talk to a compiler person, we always want to start with an error because it's the easiest way. If someone in the future is like, but a warning would solve all these problems, like that's great. We can make that a warning and that doesn't break people. When you go the other direction, people get mad. They send emails. I get pinged on Blue Sky, so got to be worried about that one.
Yeah. Right. So that said, if you combine what I said about like our desire for tooling, right? So like if I go back to this and I said, we want to be able to support adding packages with IntelliSense here. And then I think in the context of a project, I'd love to be able to type all this out with IntelliSense in a real project. And then when the error comes up, hit Control Dot to invoke a code fixer and have the code fixer say, oh, convert this to a standard package reference in the project for this file. That would be like an awesome NuGet package install experience from my point of view, in my opinion, if I wanted just to stay in the editor and I didn't have to like, change files, go to a right mouse click, open NuGet gallery or open the CS proj and edit without IntelliSense, or go to the command line and type .NET package add. I would love to make that kind of flow work. And there's really no reason we can't. Like if we're going to just make it an error, we can't there's no reason we can't make those things kind of light up eventually if we want them to. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we end up in some scenarios where, yes, you can't leave hash colon stuff in the project, but we might use it as a way to get you a nice stay in the editor types and stuff, hit control dot to apply it kind of thing in the project modality. But don't hold me to that. It's just something that we've kind of talked about.
Cool. We're sort of down the most of the comments. There's a spicy one. Will it work for .fs files too?
Right. No, not at the moment. From my understanding, and like Chet, you can talk to this more, like F# has a bunch of their own experiences for executing files, and their compiler works quite differently to the C# compiler. And so again, like focusing on learners, C# is like overwhelmingly the most ubiquitous language in our ecosystem, and so that's very much where we're focusing now. We are being careful when we design the CLI experience that we're not doing anything that would prevent us in the future adding support for other .NET languages if we decide that that's something that we want to do. So we're definitely not trying to lock out other things, but we are, sort of unapologetically saying C# is the default. So we are not going to make you put a discriminator in saying, no, I want this to be C#. No, C# is the default for these experiences, but in the future, we might introduce support for other languages. And in those cases, if it's a scenario where it's not clear what language it is, because, for example, the file doesn't have an extension, that's a whole tangent we didn't go down, but that's a thing that we are going to support, then you would have to tell us somehow, well, what language is it? Because we don't know what language it is, right? Yeah,
so fundamentally, what we're doing when we're running these files is we're looking at the content of the file and parsing it into a virtual project.
Yep.
That same concept needs to be implemented for F# source files, and the libraries for that are available. So it's all just work and scheduling that work. The CLI is completely open source, and we do accept pull requests. So if this is something that you really want to see, like, log an issue, and I personally will help you work through it because I would like to see it too. Let's see. I think we are just about in. There's a lot of comments that this makes the C# experience look and feel more Pythonic. More shell script friendly. A shout out to using this with razor slices.
Yeah, I'd love that. Once we get multi-file working, or if you just, again, because we support directory build targets and directory build props, you can turn off the fact that we turn off implicit globs. You can re-enable them again. If you want to do crazy hacky things, you can totally do that. Just the tooling may not work for you, right? Because we're obviously building the tooling along the golden path here. But yeah, I'd love to be able to do stuff like that.
Cool. Well, we're at the end of the comments. We're at the end of our allotted time too. Is there any last stingers you all would like to say? I guess call to action wise, to do all of this, you need the .NET 10 preview, at least preview 5 for best results SDK, which is what's out now as of this week. So go get that. You need the C# and DevKit extensions for best results as well in VS Code. And people log issues on the SDK repo for this, right?
Yeah, that's the best place to log them. We'll move them if it's appropriate to move them to another repo, but log them on .NET/SDK. As I said, just to give timing, we're in June, but preview 5 just shipped. Preview 6 kind of code freeze is very soon, and so anything that doesn't get checked in this week is very likely to end up in preview 7, and then we're kind of into the end game for .NET 10. But we're pushing hard to kind of get the things into .NET 10 that we've already talked about so far, including things like the publish support and the project refs, and obviously the VS Code experience is something that we'll just continue working on through the rest of this year, so that by the time that we launch in November, then we're looking for that to be great. The other thing is we're working on perf, so we have a whole bunch of ideas on how to make the simpler your application is, the less work we can avoid doing. We really want to get it to the case where you can .NET run Hello CS and it's sub 400 milliseconds on most machines type of thing for the first run, and then quicker than that. Yeah, I know, Jared. I know. I'm just going to invent performance targets. What's that?
He's writing check I have to cash.
Literally.
Chet
cash.
told me they're doing all these great MS Build features that we're going to be able to take advantage of as well. So like, let's hope
man,
he delivers.
I bookmarked that comment. Like I've referenced it like 20 times now since I wrote it. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. So try it out and let us know, please.
Sweet. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the day and happy hacking.